Hello everyone, and welcome to Dandelion Lessons here on Patreon. And as always, I'm so grateful that you're here, and welcome to the new patrons. We've had quite a few join us in the last week, and I'm really grateful, and I hope you're all enjoying the content so far. I love your suggestions. I'm thinking about all of it, so I'm really grateful. And today, I had a request in the comments in the community for more landscapes. So tiny landscapes would be really appropriate for us right now. And I do them a lot, and they're one of my favorite things to do. And I actually have been making them specifically for my Etsy shop lately, and it's really fun. I do one a day, and I put my first layer down and then let it dry, and then finish it up with some details and stuff, and it's just such an enjoyable thing for me. And I also think it's a wonderful way to try new color combinations, to try out compositions and ideas without committing to a big piece of paper. And maybe something really turns out beautifully, and then you can paint it larger if you want to. But tiny landscapes are super important to me, and I want to share a little bit of that technique with you. And I'll talk about my materials and stuff in a moment. But first I wanted to talk about the soul card that I drew today. And oh, it just made me happy when I saw it. It made me really happy, and it's so fertile and full of life and vibrant. All of this beautiful green, and then this figure just sort of joyfully expressing herself with this ray of light around her head. And it's just happiness and joy. And for me, that's what the creative practice is. It's joy. And it's what having a sense of community in your creative practice is as well. And I don't know if you watched my dandelion lesson on YouTube this week, but a lot of it was really about that way that we support one another as a community of mark makers and of makers. And I'm very inspired by the community of handmade paint makers that I've gotten to know and be a part of. As an artist, I use their products, and it's just such a lovely community of people that are mostly very supportive of one another, and it's just wonderful. And it's that whole idea that it's a big enough pond for all of us, and because they are making things from their heart, each one of their products is very unique and brings something different to us as mark makers. And it's a wonderful thing. And this made me think of that as well, just the joy that I feel in this community. With you here on Patreon, with the people I interact with on YouTube and on Instagram. It's just all wonderful, and it really nourishes me. I'm not a very social person. I'm kind of an introvert. I like to be home. I'm not a big party girl. So to meet, I have my close friends here where I live, but it's a little bit different. When you can connect with people that are like-minded and have a similar interest, and to support one another and share what we love. And it's a wonderful thing. So I also wanted to talk about the idea that, why I share my techniques and what I do. And when for instance, if I create a tiny landscape, I love doing it so much. I want to share that with you so you can make your own. And the wonderful thing is I'm teaching you techniques and a way to approach something. I'm not teaching you exactly what to put on your paper. And that's really important, because when we create these things, we're creating from our heart space, all right, with joy. And so no matter what techniques I teach you, even if we do the same basic structure of a landscape, yours is going to be unique to you and beautiful to you only. not to you only, beautiful to everyone, but beautiful in its own unique way that's unique to you. That's what I'm trying to say. So, with that said, I would like to go through my process of creating a tiny landscape. And I paint what I love and what I know. And the land that surrounds me is very important to my life. And it's really the subject of most of my work. The birds in my backyard, the plants that grow in the field, you know, the landscape that I love. And so for you, for this one, you might want to do the same kind of thing I do, or you might want to take the techniques that I teach you and think about a place that is special to you and break it down into its simplest components and create a tiny landscape of it. So I'm going to talk about my materials. I have water here, some paper towels, and I have here a little stack of paper pads from Legion Paper. And I love these. You can buy them on their website, legionpaper.com. And I love them because they're just the perfect size for a little tiny landscape. They're just wonderful. And so I think I'm going to use the warm white. They come in all different colors, which is really fun. And they're nice, sturdy paper, you know. They're perfect for watercolor, all of them. This one is even interesting. This is craft paper, and I love making landscapes on this. And when I do, I tend to use more opaque colors, and I tend to use a little bit of white to bring some lightness to it. So that's a fun one. But this is warm white. It's a Stonehenge paper. And then here I have my set of handmade watercolors from A. Gallo. Alina Gallo makes these. They're handmade in Italy. She lives in Assisi, where St. Francis is from, which I love. And it comes in this beautiful little tin. And I purchased her 12 earth colors, and then she sent me this beautiful pan of sap green. So I'm going to be using those today. You can use whatever watercolors you like, okay? It doesn't matter. Whatever colors speak to you is fine. You know, try to find a good assortment, a good range of colors, some reds, some yellows, some blues, maybe some greens, a brown, okay? So these are very earthy colors. So they're perfect for the kind of landscape that I like to paint. And the first thing I usually do is I take a pencil and I create a boundary for myself, and that helps me. You don't have to do that, but it helps me. And I start by just putting 4 dots, one in each corner of the paper, okay? And then I use the pencil to just draw a very loose fluid line. I'm not looking for straight lines, I'm looking for just a loose fluid line, even if they have a little bit of curve to them. And that just gives me a boundary, and I like having that, okay? And I start with a sky. And I'm thinking today sort of a soft blue sky. And so I'm going to start with a little of the indigo and just put a little bit at the top with lots of water in it. And I just put the paint right on the paper. And then I'm going to go to this blue, which is sort of a cerulean blue. And honestly, I can't remember what it's called, but it's really pretty. It's just a lighter blue. And I'm just going to just drop it in and move it across the sky. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this gray. It's like a stone gray. And I like to not just have blue in the sky. I like to give a little bit of movement and shadow. So I'm just taking that gray and just sort of pushing it up into the sky. Maybe a little bit more of this blue here and there. And then here's some buff titanium, buff titanium, sorry. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that in. So notice how with my clouds, I'm moving in a sort of a diagonal way and just very loose and free. I'm not trying to paint perfect clouds because clouds aren't perfect. They're always changing. And I find the more random I am, the more realistic they look and the more fascinating. So once I have these 3 colors down, I really like what's happening, but I'm going to add a little water to it. I'm just taking clear water and just sort of pushing clear water through, random, totally random, through my sky, just to give it more fluidity and let those paints have a chance to sort of mix and mingle with one another. And then I'm just going to smooth out the bottom here. And then I'm going to go to my foreground. And I think I'm going to do a mix of golds and greens. And I'm going to start with a little bit of this sort of yellow ochre color. And I'm just going to use some directional lines and put some gold in. So I'm not just going straight across because the land has shape. And this is all imaginary, but I just want the land to have shape. So you see, I just sort of, I put them down in diagonal lines. Because I'm left-handed, I tend to go from left to right. If you're right-handed, you might go the other way, which is fine, okay? And then I'm gonna wet my greens, all 3 of them. There's 3 greens here. And I'm going to pick up some of this muted, the lighter muted green. And I'm going to drop it in the same sort of directional way. A little bit more. And then I'll pick up the green that's a little bit darker, but it's still sort of muted, and drop it in, kind of using the same direction. And as I get toward the foreground, things get darker and they start to straighten out a little bit. So then I'm going to use some of this bright green for the very front. Then I'm going to rinse my brush and dry it off, and I'm rolling it to a point on my paper towel. And I think I'm going to just put some directional lines with the tip of my brush. Just sort of sweep that clean brush through here and there, in between these colors. And just sort of change direction and make it really loose and free. I'm just sort of dragging my brush through. And as you notice, what that does is it sort of blends them together, but it also gives me a little bit of a grassy texture, like it's long field grass. Just dragging the tip of my brush. I can go down, dry my brush off a little bit, and then I can also flick up. And both is a really good idea to do both. So now that I have the first layer of my field in, I'm going to go to the tree line, and I'm going to use, I'm going to use the indigo and a little bit of this sort of rusty burnt sienna color, because blue and orange make brown or black. So I want this sort of dark earthy color. And I'm just going to take the tip of my brush and start dropping in a tree line. Just make it random. I'm using these up and down strokes. And what's beautiful is these colors separate a little bit. And they make this gorgeous, soft color like trees in the distance. Okay? So it's very random. It's just this up and down movement, just dropping it in. And because the sky is still a little bit wet, that paint will creep up into the sky and give the illusion of tree branches sticking up. And I love that. So now my brush is clean and dried off, and I'm just going to run the tip of my brush along that tree line just to soften it a little bit. Okay? Then I'm going to pick up a little bit of that bright green on the tip of my brush. Whoops, not quite wet enough, but not too wet. And just drop a little bit of that green here and there, just with the tip of my brush. I'm just dropping it in, just to give it a little bit of color. And then on the edges, I'm going to take my brush and just sort of smooth my edges a little bit. You can see where I got a little messy over here, which is fine. Just smoothing that in. And at the end, we'll put a little pencil around the edge, so there. Clean brush, roll it dry, and again, I'm just smoothing that edge. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of that golden yellow again and just sort of drop it along that edge so they just sort of mix and mingle with each other at the line of the trees. Just bring it down a little bit if you need to, just to blend it in. Okay, so I'm really happy with that. I'm going to let that dry, and then I will be back to show you how to add a few final details. Okay, so this layer is now pretty dry, and I put a close-up in there for you to see how it looks at this stage. So now we're going to continue on and add just a little bit of detail to it. Quite honestly, I mean, this is beautiful just as it is, but I like to add a few little touches here and there. So I wanted to say something about this brush too. So in the kit that I bought from Egalo, they included this little brush. It's called a Tintoretto Sintetico, and it's an Italian brush. It's a size 6, and it's a little travel brush. And I have to say, it is a wonderful brush. I really like it. It has a very, very fine point. It holds water really well for a synthetic, and it has a lot of spring to it. So, I mean, I would buy more of these if I could. It's a really wonderful brush. So just so you know that, if you have the opportunity to choose a set, if you want to buy from Egalo, and if they have the brush offered, I would get it. It's really super, and it's a perfect size for these little landscapes. So I'm looking here, and I am totally happy with my sky. Sometimes I will add some depth to the sky, but on this one I am completely happy with it. I'm not going to touch it. Now the tree line did beautiful things. The colors separated. I have all these different hues in here. Really, really lovely. But I am going to add a little bit of depth to the bottom. And so I'm going to take that first color that we used, and I'm just going to warm it up a little bit. I'm going to use some of this sort of red-purple color, but even more burnt sienna would be great. And I don't want it too dark, but about a medium tone. I want it to be transparent. And I'm going to get it on my brush and then just sort of lightly dry my brush off. And then down at the bottom, I'm just going to add in some sort of random little marks with my brush. I'm just letting my brush sort of skip around toward the bottom. It's adding some texture and dimension to the bottom of that tree line. Usually, at the bottom of tree line, it gets a little bit darker if you look at the landscape because it's in shadow. So you can see I'm being very delicate. I'm just using the tip of my brush and just sort of going across. I don't want any really hard edges, anything too dramatic. I just want a little bit of texture and depth toward the bottom. Really, really delicate. Okay? I'm so happy with this back here. I'm not going to touch it at all. But I do think I'm going to take a little bit more of that beautiful sap green and just sort of get it wet with water. And again, just touch here and there where I just put the paint, just to have a little bit of variation in the color. I love that. And when it dries, it'll be much lighter, and it's just a nice effect. There. You could use any color. I've used blue, I've used orange, I've used rosy pink. These are not supposed to be realistic. These are kind of dreamy little tiny landscapes. So just choose a color that feels pleasing to you at that moment. So now that that's done, I look at the field, and I think what I'll do is I'll take a little bit more gold, pretty pale, just sort of mix it on my palette a little bit, and just very lightly run it along the bottom of the tree line. I don't want it to go too close because I don't want everything that I just did to run down, but I do want to brighten up that yellow just a little bit, just make it glow. And I can even bring it down, whatever's left on my brush, and just sort of bring it down to the foreground to warm up that field. And it also sort of unifies everything. And then I'm going to add a little bit of depth to my grass down here. So we used the brighter sap green, a brighter green for the bottom. So I'm going to start with that color, and I'm going to mix in everything else that's on my palette, or you could just mix in a little gray or brown. I just want to mute it out a little bit and make it a little bit darker. So I kind of have this dark sap green that's not quite as bright. I'm going to dry my paintbrush off, get a little more color, dry it off again. I want a very dry brush with color in it. And I'm just going to use the tip of my brush again to do these little grass-like wispies at the bottom. Just random little marks. Sometimes I even add a third layer to these. They're all different, each of them is unique. Even if I paint, as you notice, I paint the same scene often. This is a special place to me, and I know it by heart, So I paint it often, but it has different moods, and when I use different colors, and every time I approach it, it turns out a little bit differently. So I'm just adding a little bit of texture and depth to the bottom. I just go really randomly with my marks, just to give the foreground a little bit of darkness, and that's all. So at this point, I'm very, very happy with this. Sometimes I like to add a little bit of gold, like sun gold mica from Wildthorn, to the horizon line. But I think this one is really beautiful, just the way it is. So I'll leave it. So as you can see, the steps are the same no matter what kind of landscape I'm doing. I start with a sky, really random, never back and forth, but just really loose kind of random washes, dropping in different colors. Try all different combinations. There are many, many colors of sky. I've seen a pure yellow sky before. I have pictures of it. So try just about any combination you can imagine, all right? And then you go right down to the field, and you use directional lines, not back and forth, but bring them diagonally. Bring them just straight forward from the center, and then move out in either direction. Give the land a slope if you want. Make it slope together. However it looks is fine. There are so many different windows on our world, and this is just a small snapshot of a piece of land. So it can take many, many different directions. But back and forth just isn't as interesting. Okay, so try some direction. And then build from light to dark. From the horizon line, you're going to be lighter. And then as you come forward, you get a little bit darker. Change the colors up a little bit. Put different colors in your field. And then using a tip of a dry brush, put yourself some directional lines in there. And then we go up to the tree line, and I usually like to mix two colors together so I get a little bit of that separation, makes it more interesting. And I'm using just an up and down stroke all the way across. Again, random heights. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. It's different every time. Okay, and then maybe even drop in a little bit of a third color here and there. Let it dry, and then come back and reassess. Where do you need a little depth? Where do you need a little more texture? And that's what I did in the second step. And even sometimes when this would dry, you know, because paintings change as they dry. And when it's totally dry, I will look at it again and say, do I need a little bit more dark down here? Do I need a little bit of depth here or more texture? You know, so I'm always reassessing. But usually after the second pass, I'm happy. Okay? So that is all for today's dandelion lesson. I hope you enjoyed this tiny landscape, and I really hope you'll share them. You can upload them in the community where you can post pictures there. Please make note that I have not discovered a way to post pictures from the app. You have to do it from the website. Okay, so you have to go to patreon.com and sign in and do it that way. The app does not have an option for you all to upload photos that I know of. I cannot find one. So if you want to share photos, please do. You can also put them on social media like Instagram. I'm on Instagram every day. Not so much Facebook, but Instagram. And then you can use the hashtag Kateri's Dandelions on Patreon. And then we can all see each other's work that way. You can just search for that hashtag, and you can even follow that hashtag. So anytime somebody uploads a picture, it will show up in your feed, which is really great. But I would love to see what you do. If you have any questions at all, please ask. And let's try to remember, I don't even think we have to try. It's just a wonderfully supportive community, and that's what we're here for, to support each other, to lift one another up. And to cheer each other on and encourage and inspire. And you know what? We're here to do the same for ourselves, to inspire ourselves and encourage ourselves. We want to feel joy in our creative practice. Okay? All right, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back tomorrow with a wonderful watercolor techniques video. Okay? Take care. Thank you.